they always give it back. You know what I mean? It's like I get from them and they get from me, and we give to each other. That's the reason I'm so energetic on stage, because my audiences, they're so...
Man.
So where are you? He said, I'm in Philadelphia. He said, I want you to come to my show tonight. So I said, your show? I said, who are you with? He said, I'm with myself. I said, well, what? What are you doing there?
They called her the Godmother of Soul, the woman who fed presidents, healed crowds, and buried her rivals with nothing but a note. But at 81, Patti LaBelle isn't feeding anyone's ego anymore. For the first time in her long and glittering career, the Queen of Philly Soul has spoken names she kept buried for half a century, the 5 men she says she truly hated. These are names whispered in studios, printed on platinum records, and carved into the darkest corners of her memory. Men who loved her voice but feared her power, who smiled in public and wounded her in private. Behind every standing ovation was a bruise she never showed. Behind every gospel high note was a memory she could never forgive. They called her Mother Patti because she nurtured everyone, but she remembered every betrayal. Half a century of music, 2 broken marriages, and a legacy built on both grace and fire have led to this moment of truth. This is not the story of a saint or a diva. It is the confession of a woman who survived her own legend. 5 names, 5 scars, and 1 truth the music world prayed she would never tell. 1. Wilson Picket, the threat that shook the stage. He was the first name on her list, the man whose voice could move a crowd and whose temper could stop a heartbeat. In the smoky summer of 1969, when soul ruled America and every stage was a battlefield, Patti LaBelle learned that applause could turn dangerous in an instant. Wilson Picket was the king of Southern soul, explosive, magnetic, and feared even by his friends. They called him the Wicked Picket, and he wore the title like armor. Patti, still rising with the Bluebells, had been invited to open for his Gospel Soul tour that year. She expected mentorship, maybe even camaraderie. What she got instead was a lesson in male rage disguised as genius. On August 15, 1969, inside Chicago's Regal Theater, the tour's soundcheck began like any other. The band rehearsed 634-5789, Picket's anthem, with Patti and her girls providing background harmonies. Tired from travel, Picket barked at the musicians, cursing between takes. Patti, always fearless, waited until her cue and added a soaring improvisation, a spontaneous gospel run that sliced through the hall like lightning. The crew clapped. The reporters laughed in delight. For one shining second, she had outsung the man everyone worshipped. Then silence. Picket's eyes narrowed. He walked toward her slowly, dropped his microphone so hard the metal cracked against the stage, and leaned close enough for her to feel his breath. Witnesses would never forget his words. "If I had a gun, I'd shoot you." No one moved. The applause died. One of the Bluebells began to cry. Picket turned, his boots echoing off the wooden floor, and disappeared down the corridor. That night, Patti performed with her eyes downcast, every note trembling between defiance and fear. The label later smothered the story, calling it a misunderstanding during rehearsal. But inside dressing rooms and tour buses, musicians whispered about it for years. The Queen of Philly Soul had crossed the wrong man and lived to tell the tale. It wasn't an isolated outburst. Picket's rage would become infamous. In 1974, he was arrested for assaulting a woman in his home. In 1987, for firing a gun during a domestic dispute. In 1991, for injuring a pedestrian while intoxicated. Each headline reminded Patti of the monster she'd glimpsed that day in Chicago. She never spoke his name again, but she changed her life after him. From that tour onward, she hired her own bodyguard, reviewed every contract herself, and refused to let any man dictate her stage presence. Friends said that threat scarred her, but it also hardened her. It taught her that in the music industry, a woman's talent could be both her crown and her curse. Years later, when a journalist asked why she never recorded with Picket again, she gave a single, razor-sharp answer: because some men can't stand when a woman sings louder than they do. When Wilson Picket died in January 2006, the world mourned a legend. Patti sent flowers, nothing more, no tribute, no words. For her, he was still the man who reminded her that brilliance without control is just violence with rhythm. He was the first wound in a list she'd carry for life, proof that even the loudest cheers could hide a loaded gun. And as that chapter closed, another waited in the wings. Because if Picket was the storm that almost broke her, the next man on her list would strike somewhere far colder, not with anger, but with ego. 2. James Brown. The crown that couldn't be shared. Every kingdom has room for only one ruler. In the 1970s, soul music had two, a godfather and a queen, and both refused to kneel. If Wilson Picket taught Patti LaBelle that rage could destroy, James Brown would teach her that ego could humiliate. Their rivalry wasn't born of hatred, but of reflection. He was the mirror she never asked for, brilliant, explosive, and allergic to sharing the spotlight. By 1973, James Brown was untouchable. Sex Machine, The Payback, Get Up Off of That Thing. Every record bent the world to his rhythm. He arrived everywhere in a cloud of silk and sweat, an army of bodyguards in tow, and an ego big enough to fill the Los Angeles Convention Center. Patti, fresh off her transformation from the Bluebells into LaBelle, had just shattered the boundaries of what a black woman could be on stage. She wore metallic bodysuits instead of gowns, sang about power instead of heartbreak, and brought gospel fury into the world of glam rock. The industry crowned him Godmother of Soul. But she was the Queen of Fire, and the Godfather never bowed to a queen. Their paths crossed constantly, on the same festival lineups, television specials, even charity galas. Brown ruled his stage like a general. Patti treated hers like a sermon. Behind closed doors, producers whispered that the tension between them was electric. They respected each other, but only from a distance, two forces that could never meet without an explosion. The explosion came in May 1973 at the Soul Train Music Awards in Los Angeles. The ceremony was broadcast live from the Aquarius Theater on Sunset Boulevard, a glittering event celebrating the rise of black music after decades in the shadows. Patti arrived in a crimson jumpsuit, fresh off her European tour, while Brown made his entrance 20 minutes late in a white fur cape that shimmered under the stage lights. He was scheduled to close the show with his band, the JBs, but rumors circulated backstage that Don Cornelius wanted Patti to end the night with Down the Aisle, a song that left audiences sobbing. Minutes before airtime, witnesses said Brown confronted the show's director in the hallway, shouting that nobody closed a show after James Brown. The argument drew a crowd of performers and reporters. Patti, unaware at first, was called over to smooth things out. What followed became one of the most infamous backstage moments in Soul Train history. According to multiple eyewitnesses, and later confirmed in a 1974 Ebony exposé, Brown turned on Patti the second she approached. He accused her of trying to turn a funk show into Sunday service. He mocked her signature gospel expressions, calling them church faces. The crew froze. Patti tried to defuse the moment, saying she only wanted to sing her piece and honor the crowd. Brown laughed, tossed his cape at one of his handlers, and walked away, muttering that the stage is no place for preachers. The cameras backstage captured fragments of the fight, enough for gossip columns to feast on for months. Within days, Jet magazine ran a headline, "Brown and LaBelle clash behind the curtain." Soul newspaper claimed it was the royal rift of rhythm. To the public, it was theater. To Patti, it was humiliation. What wounded her most wasn't the insult. It was the laughter that followed. The audience watching at home didn't see tears, only two stars at war. But inside her dressing room, she wept behind her false eyelashes, whispering to her makeup artist, "He thinks he's the only one who can burn." For years, that moment haunted her. She turned down invitations to appear on any show that featured James Brown. When Picket hosted a tribute to soul legends in 1978, she withdrew hours before the broadcast after learning Brown would headline. Even Quincy Jones, who admired both, failed to reconcile them. In a private dinner in 1980, when asked if she and James would ever perform together, Patti reportedly smiled and said, "We already did. He played God, I played myself." The rivalry wasn't just personal, it symbolized a generational shift. James Brown's kingdom was built on control, on making his band members pay fines for mistakes, on choreographing every breath. Patti represented the opposite: chaos, freedom, surrender to spirit. Their conflict was bigger than two egos. It was the struggle between discipline and divine madness, between male authority and female rebellion. Ironically, both were victims of their own legends. By the late 1970s, Brown's empire began to crumble under tax troubles and legal scandals. Patti, meanwhile, was reborn through Lady Marmalade, the record that crowned her not just as a singer, but a symbol. When reporters asked her years later about their feud, she didn't deny it. "He was brilliant," she said in 1984, "but his ego was ungodly." It was the only time she ever spoke his name on record again. Decades later, when Brown was arrested in 1988 for domestic violence, Patti was asked if she felt sorry for him. She paused before answering. "I don't like seeing a man destroy his own kingdom," she said softly. "But I warned him, you can't be your own God forever." When he died on Christmas Day 2006, she stayed silent. No statement, no tribute, no appearance at his funeral in Augusta. Just silence, the same silence she used to end every feud she knew she had already won. Behind that silence was a truth the public never saw, that her hatred wasn't born from rivalry, but from disappointment. James Brown was everything she wanted men in the industry to be: fearless, visionary, powerful. But he used that power to remind her where she wasn't supposed to stand. That day in 1973, he didn't just insult her faith. He mocked every woman who had ever brought gospel into a world ruled by men who confused control with genius. In the end, Patti respected his music, but never his soul. The Godmother of Soul may have ruled the charts, but she outlasted him, a queen with no need for permission, carrying scars that became songs. And as his legend faded into scandal and memory, hers only grew brighter. James Brown bruised her pride, but he also solidified her purpose. From that clash forward, Patti LaBelle stopped chasing crowns. She started burning them. And the next man on her list would do something far worse than mock her faith or steal her spotlight. He would make her question it entirely. 3. Al Green, the preacher who broke the choir. He found God after sin. She found sin inside God's men. That was how Patti LaBelle would later describe the man who turned her faith into suspicion. Reverend Al Green, the velvet voice of soul, the man who could make holiness sound like temptation. In the 1970s, no one in gospel or soul could rival his blend of sanctity and seduction. Women wept at his concerts, men copied his tone, the church praised his rebirth. But Patti saw something different behind the halo, a darkness that sang in tune with his charm. Their paths crossed in 1977 when Atlantic Records proposed a gospel duet that could merge two eras of soul. Patti had just finished her groundbreaking LaBelle years and was exploring deeper spiritual material. Al was reinventing himself as a preacher after surviving one of the most shocking scandals in music history. The collaboration was meant to heal the rift between the sacred and the secular. Instead, it became a lesson in hypocrisy, ego, and fear. It began in Memphis, Tennessee, inside Royal Recording Studios, a modest brick building where Al Green had recorded his early hits. The first session was scheduled for April 14, 1977. Patti arrived in a white pantsuit and silver heels, carrying a Bible and her own lyric notes. Al greeted her with a long embrace and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. The producers described the atmosphere as holy chaos, gospel musicians tuning their instruments, engineers whispering prayers, and Al pacing the room like a restless preacher. The duet they planned to record was called Lord, Lift Me Higher. It was meant to be an anthem of redemption. But as the microphones warmed, the session began to unravel. According to sound engineer Willie Mitchell Jr., Patti questioned the arrangement, saying the rhythm section drowned out the message. Al responded with a sermon instead of an answer. For nearly 15 minutes, he lectured the room about obedience, purity, and divine submission. Patti stood silent at first, then snapped, "I came to sing, not be saved." The studio went quiet. Al slammed his Bible shut, muttering about women who lose their faith once they get famous. That was the breaking point. Patti removed her headphones, left the booth, and walked straight out into the Memphis night. She never returned. Rumors spread quickly. Some said she cried during the final take. Others claimed Al had grabbed her wrist when she tried to leave. One assistant later told Jet magazine that a reel existed, a raw vocal take where Patti's voice trembled through tears while the preacher's shouts bled faintly through the control room mic. The tape was never released. Some believed Atlantic destroyed it to protect both stars. Others said it still existed, locked in a vault in New York, proof of the day divinity met defiance and lost. But the story didn't end in that studio. To understand the bitterness that followed, you had to go back 3 years earlier, October 18, 1974, the day the world discovered what Al Green was truly capable of. That morning, Memphis police responded to a domestic incident at Al's home. His girlfriend, Mary Woodson, had attacked him with a pot of boiling grits while he was showering, causing second-degree burns across his back. Moments later, she ended her own life, and his world changed forever. Newspapers across America printed the details in horrifying sequence. Singer burned, woman dead, motive unclear. The tragedy shattered his career overnight. Within months, Al announced he had heard the Lord's call and became an ordained minister at the Full Gospel Tabernacle Church. The faithful rejoiced. The press called it rebirth. Patti called it a disguise. Behind the scenes, industry insiders whispered about the violence that had always followed him, the jealousy, the rage, the control. By 1976, multiple women had accused him of aggression or manipulation, though most refused to go public. When he returned to the studio with Patti in 1977, many wondered whether the preacher had truly changed or simply changed his wardrobe. For her, the answer came swiftly. The fallout from their aborted session turned brutal. Gossip magazines claimed Patti had warned Al that God would punish him if he didn't confess his sins. Others alleged she'd cursed his next album, the Belle album, ironically titled, which was recorded later that same year. A tabloid in Detroit even ran the headline, "Patti's Prophecy, the Preacher's Fall." None of it was true, but the damage was done. Al's congregation turned defensive, insisting she was jealous of his ministry. Her own fans began calling her too worldly for gospel. The collaboration that was meant to unite the two giants of soul became a dividing line neither of them could cross again. By 1979, Al Green had fully retreated into the pulpit, preaching every Sunday in Memphis while occasionally recording gospel records on the side. Patti, on the other hand, soared. Her live performances became testaments to independence and power, filled with the same spiritual fire Al once tried to control. Yet, even as her fame grew, the scar from Memphis lingered. Friends said she refused to pray with male pastors for years, and every time she was invited to perform at a religious fundraiser, she'd ask who was on the guest list before accepting. If Al Green's name appeared, she declined, always politely, always firmly. In one interview from 1985, when asked about her relationship with Al, Patti smiled faintly and said, "He's doing his ministry, I'm doing mine." But later, to a close friend, she confessed something colder. "He reminds me that not every preacher wears a robe for God. some wear it to hide the devil. That bitterness deepened when new scandals emerged. In 1989, Al Green's former secretary filed a lawsuit accusing him of assault, a case that was quietly settled out of court. In 1995, another woman alleged abuse in a complaint that vanished before trial. Each headline reopened the wound Patti had tried to bury. She refused to comment publicly, but in private, she told her band that she had seen that temper, that control, that fire long before the rest of the world did. By the time Al Green was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1995, their paths were two opposite sermons. He stood on stage thanking the Lord for grace. She stood in the audience with folded arms, watching silently. Cameras caught her clapping exactly once, when his name was announced, not when he spoke. She didn't attend the after-party. Years later, in an unguarded conversation recorded during her 2013 tour rehearsals, Patti reflected on that chapter of her life. "People always ask me why I don't sing in the church anymore," she said quietly. "It's because I've seen what lives behind those pulpits. They preach forgiveness, but never ask for it." To the world, Al Green was the sinner turned saint, the preacher who survived scandal and found salvation. To Patti LaBelle, he was the proof that redemption could be just another kind of performance. He found God after sin. She found sin inside God's men. And as her voice climbed to greater heights, she carried one truth the preacher could never sell from his pulpit: that some songs can't be saved. If Wilson Pickett taught her fear and James Brown taught her pride, Al Green taught her the danger of faith in false prophets. And as she turned her back on gospel and returned to soul, she understood that her power was no longer divine. It was human, fierce, and unapologetic, the sound of a woman who had learned that sometimes heaven and hell share the same stage. 4. Herbert Martin. The contract that cut her wings. Of all the men who crossed her, Herbert Martin was the one Patti LaBelle could never quite forgive. Not because he broke her heart, but because he broke her name. After surviving the chaos of Wilson Pickett, the humiliation of James Brown, and the hypocrisy of Al Green, Patti finally believed she had found safety. It was 1976. LaBelle had just disbanded, and she was standing at the edge of reinvention. Herbert appeared then, polished and persuasive, a manager with the kind of smooth confidence that made artists believe again. He told her she deserved to fly on her own, that she was more than a group, more than a trend, that she was destiny. She didn't yet know that destiny was written in fine print. Under Herbert's guidance, Patti's solo career soared. He was a strategist, not a visionary, the kind of man who smiled like a friend while thinking like an accountant. He secured her first solo tour across Europe in 1977, booked late-night television spots, and landed her a recording deal with Epic Records that promised creative freedom. To the public, he was the man who rebuilt her career. To Patti, he became family until the checks stopped matching the applause. It started small. After her 1978 Tasty tour, she noticed the numbers didn't add up. The crowds were sold out. The profits were thin. When she asked Herbert for details, he brushed her off, saying expenses were higher than expected. She trusted him, the way artists are taught to trust the men in suits who say we'll handle it. But in April 1979, during her Music Is My Way world tour, something snapped. In Amsterdam, after a triumphant show at the RAI Theater on April 22nd, Patti received an anonymous envelope slipped under her hotel door. Inside was a copy of her management contract, annotated in red ink. A fellow artist whose name she never revealed had stolen it from a filing cabinet at Martin's office and sent it to her as a warning. Buried in the text were clauses that chilled her blood. She owed Herbert 25% of gross earnings, not net. She was forbidden from publicly discussing management or financial terms under penalty of legal action. And most shocking of all, her publishing rights for 2 of her solo songs had been reassigned to a shell company linked to him. It wasn't mismanagement. It was betrayal by design. Patti didn't confront him right away. She finished the European leg of the tour with a smile painted on and fire boiling beneath it. But when she returned to Philadelphia that summer, she called a meeting. It took place on June 9, 1979, in her manager's Walnut Street office. According to a former assistant who later spoke anonymously to Variety, Patti arrived alone, in jeans and sunglasses, carrying the marked-up contract in her hand. What followed was not a conversation. It was an eruption. She slammed the papers onto his desk and demanded to know how much of her career he actually owned. Herbert reportedly kept calm, insisting it was standard industry practice. When she accused him of exploitation, he leaned back and said quietly, "You signed it, Patti. Nobody forced you." That sentence stayed with her for decades, the cold reminder that even queens could be legally trapped. Within weeks, lawyers got involved. The press never caught wind of the story, thanks to a settlement that was as secret as it was suffocating. Herbert agreed to release her from the contract, but only if she signed a non-disclosure clause that prevented her from discussing the matter publicly. She signed, not because she wanted to, but because she was exhausted. That summer, she canceled the remainder of her tour and checked into a private facility in New Jersey under the guise of vocal rest. Friends knew better. One confidant later revealed that Patti suffered what doctors called acute emotional exhaustion, a quiet breakdown brought on by betrayal and financial ruin. When she re-emerged later that year, she was different. Her laughter was sharper, her interviews shorter, her trust non-existent. During one televised interview in 1980, when asked about her team, she replied simply, "I don't have a manager, I have people who work for me." Behind the scenes, she swore she would never again let another man sign her future. She began managing herself, making every call, negotiating every deal. For the next decade, she personally reviewed every contract line by line. Assistants recalled that she refused to use the word manager entirely, telling them nobody manages a storm. But the bitterness lingered. Industry insiders whispered about the real reasons behind her split with Herbert. Some said he had siphoned over $200,000 in unreported income. Others claimed there had been a brief affair between them, one that soured when she realized he was using intimacy as leverage. While none of it was ever proven, it followed her like a shadow. In 1982, when her song "If Only You Knew" topped the R&B charts, reporters noted that she had no dedicated manager listed in the album credits. When asked why, she smiled faintly and said, "Because I learned my lesson." Herbert Martin faded from the public eye soon after. By 1985, he was managing a small roster of acts in Los Angeles, none of whom ever achieved Patti's success. In 1989, one of his former clients sued him for breach of contract, echoing the same accusations Patti had once kept secret. When the story hit Billboard, readers saw his name again for the first time in a decade, but Patti stayed silent. Silence had been forced on her once, but now she used it as power. She never needed revenge. Success was her retribution. Still, those who knew her best said the wound never healed. Every time she stepped onto a stage, she carried that memory of the night she opened that envelope in Amsterdam and realized that freedom could be just another kind of cage. Herbert Martin had promised to lift her higher, but instead he clipped her wings and sold the feathers. Decades later, when asked what she learned from her first manager, Patti didn't hesitate. "I learned to read every word," she said, "because the devil doesn't come with horns, he comes with a briefcase." Herbert Martin may not have hit her, mocked her, or preached to her, but his betrayal cut deeper than any of the others. The men before him had tried to control her voice. He had tried to own it. And if Wilson Picket was the storm, James Brown the rival, and Al Green the false prophet, Herbert Martin was the architect of her silence, the man who proved that in the music business, the sharpest knives were made of paper. And yet, even that kind of betrayal couldn't prepare her for what came next. because the next man on her list wasn't a businessman or a preacher or a jealous performer. He was one of her own, an artist who should have understood her pain but instead turned it into his weapon. 5. Luther Vandross. The mirror. She couldn't forgive. The fight began with music, but it ended with silence. July 3, 1986, the day two of soul's greatest voices stopped speaking forever. Inside the hit factory in New York, a studio built for legends, Patti LaBelle and Luther Vandross were supposed to record a remix of You Are My Friend, the song that had defined Patti's journey from heartbreak to rebirth. For her, it was sacred. For him, it was a challenge. By that summer, Luther was no longer the wide-eyed fan who once called her the best to ever do it. He was now a star in his own right, a producer with platinum records, a perfectionist with an empire of control. What started as mentorship had turned into a rivalry disguised as collaboration, and neither of them was built to yield. The morning session started with tension. Luther arrived late, wearing his trademark dark glasses and a white silk shirt, surrounded by assistants who moved like a royal court. Patti was already there, sipping tea, flipping through her lyric notebook. "Let's make this divine," she told the engineers. But Luther wasn't listening. He wanted changes, new keys, new phrasing, even a different ending. It wasn't a remix anymore, it was a reconstruction. Patti resisted. "That song saved my life," she reminded him once, but Luther wanted to save it for radio. The disagreement began quietly, then spiraled into a shouting match so loud it stopped recording on 2 floors. Technicians later recalled that the argument lasted over an hour. He accused her of being difficult, that word women in music always heard when they refused to obey. She called him arrogant, said he was playing God with other people's feelings. When he slammed his clipboard onto the piano, she stood up, removed her earrings, and told him to leave if he couldn't respect her voice. He did, slamming the door so hard the glass panels shook. The engineer hit "Stop" on the tape reel. Patti sank into a chair, trembling, whispering, "He'll never understand what this song means." 2 days later, the tabloids did what the industry always did to women who spoke too loudly. They turned her grief into gossip. Ebony ran a story calling her volatile in the studio. Billboard quoted unnamed sources describing her as impossible to direct. When Luther was asked about the incident during his radio interview on July 10th, he smiled and said, "Patti doesn't take direction well." That one line spread faster than the record they were supposed to finish. It was a subtle cut, public, humiliating, unforgettable. But beneath the headlines was a wound far older than that day. Luther had worshipped Patti since he was a teenager. In the early 1970s, he attended every LaBelle show in New York, sneaking backstage just to glimpse her costumes. When he finally met her in 1973, he told friends it was like meeting the voice of God. For years, he called her his biggest inspiration. He sent her flowers when she lost her mother, and when she performed at the Apollo in 1982, he sat front row, mouthing every lyric. But admiration can curdle into resentment, especially when the protege becomes the competition. By 1985, Luther's fame had exploded. His albums Busy Body and The Night I Fell in Love made him the new prince of R&B, the male counterpart to the very women he'd idolized, Aretha, Dionne, Patti. And in that transformation, something changed. The student began to rewrite his teachers. In private, Patti once told a friend, "Luther wanted to be me, and then he wanted to erase me." The friendship that had begun with love notes and laughter turned into cold, professional exchanges. He criticized her wardrobe choices, her improvisations, even her faith-driven speeches during concerts. He wanted precision. She lived for passion. It was oil and holy water. Their collaboration was doomed before the first note. But the most painful betrayal came after the Hit Factory fight. Months later, during the fall of 1986, Luther launched his Give Me the Reason tour. In one performance in Atlanta that November, he introduced a song with a cutting remark that the press later picked up. Some people think volume equals talent, but real singers know it's about control. The audience laughed. Patti heard about it within a week. To her, it was as if he had walked back into that studio and slapped her across the face. Behind the glamour, both of them carried secrets. Luther, though beloved, was haunted by rumors about his sexuality, whispers he never confirmed but always feared. Patti, a fiercely protective woman who mothered every young artist she met, had once tried to shield him from that scrutiny. Insiders said she warned him about certain press questions, told him to stay guarded. But when their friendship shattered, he shut her out completely. Some speculated that he felt exposed by her protectiveness, that her maternal instinct embarrassed him. She, in turn, felt betrayed by a man she once called my brother in soul. Their Cold War lasted nearly 2 decades. When they passed each other at the 1993 Soul Train Awards, cameras caught Patti smiling stiffly while Luther stared straight ahead. He never publicly apologized. She never asked him to. But every time she performed You Are My Friend, there was a moment near the bridge, that trembling pause before the final chorus, where her eyes would glaze just slightly, as if she was back in that studio, hearing his voice echo against the walls. In 2003, when Luther suffered a massive stroke, Patti was one of the first to call his management. She offered prayers, food, help. Her calls were never returned. When he died 2 years later, she attended the memorial in New York, sitting quietly in the second row. Cameras caught her leaving before the service ended, her face hidden behind dark glasses. Reporters asked for a statement. She gave one sentence: he knew what he did. Fans speculated endlessly. Some said the fight was never about music, but about power, about a gay man challenging a straight woman who refused to be submissive. Others believed it was personal, that they loved each other in a way neither could admit. What was certain was that they reflected each other's greatness and each other's flaws. He was her mirror, talented, wounded, demanding, and impossible, and that was what made it unbearable. Decades later, when she was asked which collaboration she regretted most, Patti said softly, "The one that made me cry." She didn't say his name, but everyone knew. Luther Vandross was the one man she could never forgive, not because he hurt her career, but because he hurt her faith in her own reflection. He made her doubt the purity of her art, the meaning of friendship, the possibility of respect between equals. By the time she turned 81, she had outlived them all, the rivals, the liars, the lovers, the ghosts. But when the topic of Luther surfaced, her smile would fade just a little, as though even time couldn't sand away that scar. He had called her difficult. She called it disrespect. And between those two words, pride and pain, the greatest partnership soul music never had was buried forever. Some say hatred destroys the soul. For Patti LaBelle, it preserved it. Every grudge became a verse, every scar a melody. She didn't stay angry to stay bitter. She stayed angry to stay alive. Was she right to hold her anger, or did it cost her peace? For more untold stories behind the Queens of Soul, subscribe. The next confession is closer than you think.